But welcome. So this particular session is just on working with IT in ArchivesSpace. It's an open conversation. Patrick and I will be lightly moderating. As Christine said, my name is Jessica Crouch, formerly of the University of South Carolina. As of April 1st, I will be with ArchivesSpace as the Community Engagement Coordinator. I will be moderating this conversation with Patrick Milhoan of Notre Dame. We have some pre-submitted questions from the community that we're going to be asking, but we really do invite you to submit questions in the chat. This is an open time for you to ask any question you may have always wanted to have the opportunity to ask about ArchivesSpace and about working with IT and ArchivesSpace, but didn't know where to direct the question or who to direct the question to. We have a panel of experts available to us today. Our two experts, Laney, who is here, Laney McGlohon, who is the ArchivesSpace tech lead, and then hopefully Blake Carver of LYRASIS will be here. Maybe he'll pop on in a minute. So if you do have a question, please put it in the chat. But until then, I'm going to go ahead and read from the list of pre-submitted questions. If any of the questions are ones that Patrick or I could maybe help with, especially if they're from the archival side, since my most recent experience is an archivist and Patrick is an archivist, we'll definitely hop on as well. But the first question is, if I'm an archivist who is ready to implement ArchivesSpace, how should I communicate that with my systems department? What specific applications and configurations will they need to have for a successful install and launch?
Okay, I guess I can start. Hi, this is Laney. We actually have technical documentation that's available in a GitHub repository that talks about what kind of software you need and has more information about maybe what your system administrators might want to know. It's probably best if you point them to that, and then if they have any questions, they can always ask us at the program team for more information, or if they're not sure, for settings and those kinds of things. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. That's really helpful. The GitHub link is really helpful.
Okay.
So are there any technical languages, like programming languages or query languages, that are used frequently in ArchivesSpace that you would recommend users become familiar with?
Yeah, we use MySQL. So you have SQL. Query language is a good thing to learn. As far as programming languages are concerned, ArchivesSpace is a Ruby on Rails application. So Ruby is a good scripting language to learn. A lot of folks use Python for to use the API. So that's another language or scripting language that might be interesting for people to learn. And I think it'll make people feel more, especially the Ruby part, make people feel more comfortable with the core code base itself.
Right, we got several questions about inputting large finding aids into ArchivesSpace. Other than the rapid data entry tool, are there any ways to input large finding aids into ArchivesSpace in a way that's more efficient?
Is my mic working?
There you are, Blake.
There you are, Blake.
Okay.
Hey.
So my camera's not working. I can see myself on there, but no one can see me.
We can see you now and hear you.
Oh, okay. Yep. So I asked Brian here at LYRASIS, and he's our migration specialist about this, and I wish I could remember his answer to this one. Yeah, okay, here it is. Wait, what was the question? It was the really large finding aids, right?
Right.
So there's a tool called Steady, spelled just like the word study. And also the Harvard plugin that would get a lot of press in the first part of our day today. Although he said it might be better to start with a spreadsheet than to type everything into RDE. So there's not a great way, especially with really large finding aids, to make that happen.
Okay, and to follow up, we did get another question about someone who is using the Harvard method, but they were looking at other options. So you would say Steady would be another option to look at?
Yeah, there's Christine just posted a link to it there. There's it's running on Heroku, and it's pretty easy to just look at the page and see what it does.
Yale also has a pretty good tool for series level description and below. I believe Harvard allows you to do collection level description as well as any subordinate components. The Yale is pretty seamless. We use it here at University of Notre Dame.
Where can you find information on that?
That's a plugin?
It is not a plugin. It's external Excel spreadsheet that has some XSLT that you push it through an XSLT that preps it for ArchivesSpace. Let me see if I can find their documentation. I'll throw it in the chat box.
Great.
Is that what they refer to that as round tripping? Is that what you're describing?
I think so. I think I may have heard it mentioned in that way before, but I'm not 100% confident.
Is there anything going on in the chat, Patrick?
Links from Christine.
Yeah, just some links, some technical documentation, things like that.
Well, has anyone installed ArchivesSpace in a Windows environment against an SQL database? Or can anyone provide advice?
Was that the question where they said they're not allowed to run MySQL?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Laney and I talked about this morning. We both kind of thought it would work, but then I think we both corrected ourselves and said it only runs on MySQL.
I think a better way of putting it is that we only guarantee MySQL. That's what we test with. That's what we build with for our releases. And to test out the code, we use MySQL. I know that other people have been using, MariaDB, and I'm not sure that we've done anything in the application that would make it so you couldn't use the Microsoft SQL Server. I do know that some folks use Microsoft products at their institutions, but I'm not sure what their database backends are, to be honest. So I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'd be kind of surprised if it ran on Microsoft on SQL Server, but it's possible. I know it runs on Maria. I use Maria here, not at LYRASIS, but on my local machine here.
Right.
Any MySQL compatible thing.
Okay. Anything in the chat, Patrick?
Not yet.
All right. And this question is anyone using one instance of ArchivesSpace with multiple repositories? If so, what does management of a multiple repository instance look like?
So Jessica, are they talking about having, so I'm assuming it's at one institution and having multiple repositories for one institution, or do you think this is spread out across multiple institutions?
I'm going to assume this is one institution, and at University of South Carolina, we had multiple repositories within one instance. So
right.
It was pretty seamless.
That's my understanding. When I was at the Getty, we had two different repositories, one for special collections and one for institutional, the institutional repository. And I don't think it's pretty easy to manage. I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure exactly what the question is.
Well, the question is just what does it look like? So I guess I'll speak a little bit to what it was like at the University of South Carolina. We assigned roles just like you assign roles if you have one instance or one repository. And if you were only assigned a role within the one repository, when you logged on to ArchivesSpace, all you saw was that one repository. So if I'm working in rare books and special collections, I'm not going to see political collections. The only people who would have the authority to move between the repositories would be those with administrative privileges. And so for them, it was just making sure that before they took any sort of action, that we were in the right repository. It's easy. All right, so another question. As an archivist with very little IT background, how can I decipher what an error message means after I attempt a failed ingest or export attempt? Who should I contact?
Yeah, it seems like there's been a lot of those questions on the list lately. And I think the answer is always take a look at the log file and find where that error happened in the log file. And then there's a certain art to reading an ArchivesSpace log file, I think. But you know, there's the list, and pull out a chunk of the ugly looking stuff that's in there and post it to list, and chances are pretty good that someone's seen it before.
Okay.
But it can be very difficult. It took me, I don't know how many months to finally figure out what I was looking at in a busy log file.
Well, let's say that if I can't figure out what's going on in the busy log file, is there someone I can contact who can help me make sense of it?
Well, I think, Jessica, one of the things is posting on the listserv saying, hey, I did this and this is what happened. Has anybody else seen this? Because people are pretty good about going, yeah, I've seen that, and this is what it meant for me when we finally figured it out. So asking on the list certainly help. You can always people can always contact ArchivesSpace Home and send an email to the program team that way. And we will help direct it however it needs to go, or help people try to decipher what they're seeing.
Jessica, we did have a question come through the chat. So it's from Kara. Kara says, we upgraded to 2.5.1 in January and have had trouble with the staff interface being slow to respond when hitting particularly the edit save button function. I noticed others mentioning slowness on the listserv too. We're on Ubuntu 6 gigabyte memory with MySQL. I worked with my IT team and used the tuning AS page on the wiki, I think, to tweak the XMX setting to 2056 in archivespace.sh. But the functions are still slow. Do you have any advice for next steps?
I would check the overall load on the server. Is the entire server overloaded? And if it is, check to see if the indexer's running endlessly. You can see that in the logs pretty easily. If the logs are spinning by you super fast, then the indexer's probably running. And if it is still running and nobody's been working lately, then it could be stuck in an indexing loop where it runs and runs and runs and then hits an error and then starts over and runs and runs and runs. There's definitely not anything in 2.5.1 that would slow it down unless you upgraded from like 1.4 or 5 or something. You could feed it some more memory. The XMX, there's 2 settings, I think, in the startup script. Is that right, Laney?
Yeah.
Java, MX, XMX, and something. 2 is usually enough. 2 gigs is usually enough, so 2056 is probably okay, but you could try bumping it up to 4, and if it still doesn't help at 4, then even giving it more than that is probably not going to help. At least that's what we found in our experience. 6 gigs of mem on the entire server with MySQL is probably a little bit low, but that might be okay. It depends on how big your site is and how busy it is and that kind of thing. So it's hard to say for sure. I don't think we've seen anything in 2.5.1 that is sort of a general drag on things, but I think generally when it's running slow like that, the server's overwhelmed, and if the server's overwhelmed, it probably means that the indexer is running nonstop, and that can be really tricky to chase down those errors. You have to find the exact record in the logs and then hope that the error message is helpful, and then if it's not, you have to kind of find the record and start poking at it.
There's a follow-up question there as well, Blake, from Kara. She asked, does it matter what setting I have the log at? I have it at WARN more.
You'd still be able to see. That's a really good question. There's how many log levels are there, Laney? 4?
4.
So there's debug, there's warn, there's
error, and then
the other one.
fatal. I don't remember the worst one.
So I would suggest kicking it up to debug.
Oh, thanks, Steve. Info.
Kick it up to debug if you think there's something wrong, and that'll log a lot more than just warn. But you should be able to see I'm pretty sure you see the indexer still in just warn. Not positive though. But changing the setting to debug and then restarting it, you'll be able to tell you'll see a lot more in the logs then. I wouldn't suggest running your site every day with the log level set at debug because it can write some really big log files. I've seen, I just saw one that was like 18 gigabytes, I think. That's not healthy for the server.
That's it for the chat so far. Jessica, I want to kick back over to the other question.
Okay. I do see that Sue Hurst at Victoria University in Wellington says that they give people 2 different sets of logons whenever they're using multiple repositories in one instance. So that is an idea if you're looking to manage that. And then I've gotten a private chat saying that sometimes ArchivesSpace seems to run very sluggishly. Is there a way to best debug it, or is there some troubleshooting they can do?
I think that the same way to go is what I just described as anytime it's running slower, see if the index is running, see if it's always running, see if the server's overwhelmed. If it's if something else is using the server that could be using up resources, if someone's running MySQL queries, that can really slow things down if they forget to do a join or something. Trying to think other things that we've seen. If the public interface is enabled, there can be either purposely or accidentally malicious bot that's just crawling the site like crazy, or someone trying to break into the site, scanners and that kind of thing.
Right. Anything else in the chat, Patrick?
Yeah, we just got one come in from Allison White. She asked, we are not using ArchivesSpace, but are considering it. We are using Archivist Toolkit and have been importing XML files successfully into AT, but they are not EAD files. Is there a way to import XML that is not EAD into ArchivesSpace? Would this require a plugin?
Great question.
Well, I guess one of my questions is what kind of XML file is it? I don't know if this is MARC or DC or something like that, because there are ways to import some of those. The other thing is there's a possibility you could take the XML and reformat it into a CSV and use the Harvard plugin. So that's a couple of ideas I have. I'm trying to remember what the Archivist Toolkit imports for XML files were.
Oh, she says it's a customized XML, locally customized.
And it also, this is Christine, it depends where you're trying to import it into. Are these accession records? Are they resource records? Those would be some of the questions I would have too. Accession records, yeah. I kind of thought that might be because AT had an XML import into accessions. So there is definitely a CSV, yeah, there is a CSV import into accessions. I don't know if there's another way. I don't know if the API here is relevant or other things that you can think of. Blake, Brian might be the person to call on for this one in terms of taking customized XML and getting it into accessions, which is a little bit easier than some other things because accession records are more flat. Yeah,
is it the XML is coming out of some kind of thing, some kind of system that won't spit out EAD or something that is easier to work with.
Are these coming out of a database, Allison? If they are accessions, it makes sense that you're not trying to get it out of EAD.
Oh, Word doc.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah, there's not great ways to work with that, I don't think. Although if the XML is pretty well formed, it might not be super hard to transform it into something useful. Yeah. You know, as speaking as not the one who has to do it, I think it would be not too hard to do it.
Right. I would agree.
Looks like we had another one come in from Danielle Butler. Is there documentation on the modifications to improve speed like what Kara mentioned somewhere that I could point our IT department to?
I'm looking in our tech docs repo. Let me see if I can find a good link to put into the chat for that.
Is there a tuning doc?
There is. I got it.
I thought.
Okay. All right, going back to the list. What are the recommended configurations for Java? Do you require Oracle JDK over OpenJDK? Is anyone using OpenJDK, and if so, what configuration changes did they make?
Yeah, we run all our sites on Open as very standard. I don't think we do anything weird to it.
We have automated tests that run for all of the ArchivesSpace releases, and it checks both Oracle and the OpenJDK, so either one should work fine.
Okay.
I can't remember the rest of the question.
Well, if they made any special configurations or changes.
No, there isn't anything for that.
Okay. What are the steps for having ArchiveSpace run as a different user? In parentheses, I have tried setting the user in the config file, and ArchiveSpace fails to launch.
So I don't think you need to change anything in the config file. It's always, so if you're running it on a Linux server, I'm assuming, I don't know. Is it fair to say most people run it on Linux? I run it on Linux, so I assume everybody's just like me. So if you're on Linux, don't run it as root, but it doesn't need any special changes for users or anything, assuming that all the files in that directory are owned by that user.
Right. What kind of user are they trying to change? Do you think it's the user for the database? I'm not sure exactly what parameter they're changing in the config file.
Yeah, hopefully the person that asked that question is here and we can follow up with more questions.
I just don't know how to answer the question otherwise.
Yeah, if that question, if you know what that question is referring to, please chime in the chat box.
It doesn't require any special users or anything. I assume on Windows you don't want to run it as admin on Windows, and I know you don't want to run it as root on Linux. But
Right.
as long as, like I run it as Blake on my machine here, and it just writes all the files as me.
Mhm.
A couple more came through, Jessica, from Tom Adams. My site is running with a Red Hat VM with 2 gigabytes of RAM and 2 gigabytes swap. Would that configuration cause performance problems?
The entire VM has 2 gigabytes. That's a little small. If you have some extra RAM laying around, I would feed it a couple more. Although if you're a lone arranger and you're putting one thing in at a time, that could very well be enough. If the public side's not enabled, that lightens it up too. So it kind of depends. If it feels slow, then that's probably not enough. Otherwise, it's probably okay. At that size, I think it depends on a lot. A lot depends on how much it's being used, though.
Another one from Bill G. How is Oracle's new policy on Java going to affect ArchivesSpace?
I don't think it's going to affect it at all. I'm not sure. How do you think it's going to affect it, Bill? I mean, we use the open JDK, so I'm not sure their new policies on Java is going to matter. Oh, I'm sorry. I know what you're talking about now. Sorry. It's been a long day. I honestly don't know. I've got it listed on my list of things to look into, actually.
Is that the one from late last year?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember we talked about that at the time.
We did, and I think it was something I needed to look into more. Right.
All right. From the list, as a member institution utilizing LYRASIS to host our instance of ArchivesSpace, what mechanisms are in place to access our database?
Oh, that's a great question. And I know the answer. We do offer read-only access to your database. It's funny, I just got an email about that. I wonder if that's the same person that's asking me that question. We support MySQL Workbench, but I know other people are using something on the Mac that's not Workbench that I can't remember the name of, but other things. Anything that you can connect, you can tunnel through SSH to a server and then connect to a MySQL database should work. But generally, we support MySQL Workbench, and we use MySQL Workbench to do some of the work. So we know that works.
There was also some discussion in the first block about if you're hosted by LYRASIS and you want to implement plugins, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, you send us an email, support@lyrasis.zendesk.com, and just ask. And I've already got one question on that from the first session. And I think my answer in the first session was we don't guarantee we can run any plugin, just because, and it's not happens very often where someone asks and we said, that's too scary looking. But a couple times we've looked at a plugin and there's been like a hard-coded URL to someone else's site, or I don't know, Mark's made pull requests back to other plugins so that we can run them and that kind of thing. But in general, we can usually run anything, but definitely not everything. And that's something we don't allow access to the server, so that's something that we enable and then switch on. I know Laney's doing a presentation next about plugins.
In the next block. Yeah, it's later.
So if you want to learn all about plugins, don't miss Laney's exciting session.
Thanks, Blake.
All right. Anything in the chat, Patrick?
Yeah, something came through from Steven. What is the contact at AS for plugin advice? Blake, do you have that email address that you can throw up there?
So if LYRASIS hosts your site, then it's support at LYRASIS. I should just type that, support at lyrasis.zendesk.com for LYRASIS hosted sites. And it's ArchivesSpace at archivespace.org. Is that right, Laney?
ArchivesSpace home at lyrasis.org if it's a general question.
Oh, so close.
Blake works on he works on a different side of LYRASIS. He works for the hosting side of LYRASIS. That's why he doesn't know our general email address.
Yes. LYRASIS and ArchiveSpace are not the same thing. We're cousins, not siblings, not twins. I don't know what the best way to put it is.
I'll be talking about that in the next. We're just giving these teasers for things in the next block. You got to stick around for another 5 hours if you want to hear that.
All right.
And Laura did add one other thing. She says sometimes scary-looking database migrations are gem dependencies as well, and that's a good point. So, those are definitely things that we look for. This is going back to the plugins thing. If you're someone who's thinking about installing someone else's plugin, the two biggest reasons that we would ever say no and get scared, as Laura said, scary looking, would be if there's a lot of database changes in there or a whole bunch of gems. Gems are sort of like plugins for the Ruby language. Is that a good way to put it, Laney?
Yeah, it's just libraries.
Yeah, libraries. So they're things that extend other things that are already there. So those things can go wrong really, really fast.
All right. Is there anything in the chat, Patrick?
Nothing I'm seeing now. Oh, there it is. Is there a known issue with using both the Harvard Excel plugin and the LCNAF plugin? We're wondering if we were having that problem. Have LCNAF installed, can't make Excel plugin work. We're using 2.5.1.
No, we definitely have a lot of sites running both. I would say if you remember, chop out a chunk of the logs where the errors are and post it to the list and see if anybody else, or ask on the Excel plugins GitHub page. She's very responsive. Bobby Fox is the one who wrote it, and she's helped a lot of people open an issue there, and she's been very responsive and hopeful of fixing problems with their plugin.
All right. It's been very technical. So let's take it back to a question that's one that I can follow. So there are probably a lot of archivists that may be reluctant to try ArchivesSpace because they don't have a tech background or have little in the way of tech support. What sort of advice or resources can you provide that would ease potential concerns?
It's easy.
I think we've got some videos that they might want to watch and that might make them feel more comfortable. I think it was earlier today, Christine showed some links to, we have a YouTube channel, and so there are other users who were talking about how they use the system. As far as setting it up yourself, there's a getting started page in the technical documentation. One of the things that I would appreciate if somebody is in this boat and they try to use the getting started documentation and it's not, doesn't have enough information or it needs to be written in a better way, if they want to contact me, maybe we can work through improving that so that they can get themselves set up, plus we can help others who have the same level of comfort get set up as well.
Yeah, it's not a horrible thing to set up if you already have some level of understanding on how to run somewhat complicated applications. I'm trying to really choose my words carefully there.
That's not very encouraging.
I'm already here.
Well, I would not recommend it for anybody to just install it when they're not already somewhat tech savvy.
I think it depends. One of the things that I've been at several institutions that have, for no better word than struggled with trying to get ArchivesSpace up. I've done it several times on my own machine. I've done it on my personal machine, my Windows. I've got a Mac that I've run it on as well. And I think, trying to do that first might make it less scary. Trying to, I believe the hardest part mostly the scariest part is trying to figure out how to hook up a MySQL database. Out of the box, ArchivesSpace will run with you just unzipping the release and running either the .bat file or the shell script, and it'll come up. It will run a database that you should never, ever use for production, but it'll at least give you an opportunity to play with it some. And that might get people more comfortable with it, just putting it on your own machine. And the next step is a little bit more complicated to hook it up to a MySQL database server. So you'd have to have that on your machine and then have to connect to it. That is takes a little bit more tech savvy, and to be honest, I don't think the MySQL documentation says that easy to follow. But I guess the first thing I would do is try to take a release and put it on your local machine and try to get that up and running first, and then start working your way through the more complicated steps to get it further along.
Yeah, it's not terrible. I mean, we definitely host things that are far, far more complicated that I would say nobody should run on their own, but ArchivesSpace is designed so that a single Lone Ranger can run it, and we can run dozens and dozens of them, and then bigger university can run theirs on a big machine with a big database and have lots of users and that kind of thing. So I think it scales up and down fairly well.
And the other thing too that Laura suggests in the chat is put questions out on the listserv, on the Google group. People are very responsive, and they've most likely been in the position you're in, right? So you don't have to feel like you're the only one, and they might have a better way of putting it in language that they might understand better. So, and you can always contact us.
Yeah, as a member, the users list is great. The people are incredibly helpful, and there's answers in no time. I don't think I've ever seen a group list like that where people are so good at helping each other.
Yeah.
Another benefit of membership.
Great marketing, Blake. Yeah, and just to second what Laura did say in the comments, that it's a learning curve to figure out how to be bold in asking questions, but just in my own implementation of ArchivesSpace at the University of South Carolina, all of the problems that I solved, none of the ideas were original. It all came from the community, and you ask the question and they have already had to ask it and solved it in a way that is workable. So definitely thumbs up to that comment. Put it to the community, or if you have the question right now, put it in the chat box. It does look like we're getting some activity on the chat.
So from Bill G again, any problems or thoughts on running AS on the same machine with a digital content system like DSpace? Or should we run a separate virtual machine for each?
Yeah, I would definitely run them on separate machines, separate servers, separate whatevers. Tim mentioned running it in Docker. I don't know if DSpace runs it in Docker or whatever else runs on Docker on that machine, but having a Docker image, a separate Docker image for that from everything else on the machine isn't a bad idea. Docker's container, which is kind of like a lightweight virtual machine, I guess is the best way to say it. And that's actually how we run ArchivesSpace. And he also said we could probably create one with a clean database to make it easy for people to try, and that's a pretty good idea, I think. I don't know how hard Docker is to get running on a machine. That's why I stumbled there, but for someone who's already running Docker, it would be pretty easy to make a Docker image or I guess just a Docker compose file that would just pull everything in pretty nicely.
All right. Going back to the list, is there a way to implement an autosave either after a certain amount of time or after going idle?
That would be awesome. You would not believe the number of times I had archivists who called me on the phone and said, I've lost all my work for the last 2 hours because I got up and went to lunch and didn't save anything. I don't know that that's on the roadmap anytime soon. My thing was just to tell the archivists that I worked with to save regularly. I think doing an autosave would be a wonderful thing. I just think it's going to take a lot more work than we've got the bandwidth for at the moment.
And then the last question I have from the list, can you provide some examples of what a non-tech savvy user can do with the database once they gain access?
That's a loaded question. I guess part of my question back to that would be, what are they trying to solve, or why have they decided they needed to get access to the database on the back end, right? I would guess it had something to be able, maybe they want to be able to query the database and get information out. We do have reports that actually are decent. So I guess it would depend on what they were why they thought they needed the back end access to the database.
I did think of one thing for non-technical user can do is just count the number of, say, accessions or digital objects or resources in the tables in the database, and then make sure that those same numbers are in the interface to check for indexing problems. Because if the indexer went sideways and it didn't index a few things, you'll see that the counts aren't the same.
Looks, there's another one came in from Mary H. Are there specs or recs that differ from production instance for installing a test AS instance?
I think that's an answer that would, I guess the answer is it depends. Ideally, you'd want test and prod to be as close as possible. Same operating system at least, same version of ArchivesSpace, or at least, you upgrade one before the other. but as far as like the size of it, like RAM and that kind of stuff, I would think a test one would be smaller. I think that's generally true. But I know I've been helping someone with a perplexing mystery about the differences between their test and production server. And I know having things as similar as possible can help you figure out where the problems are coming from that you're looking at on, between the two systems. So.
He follows up asking, should they be on a separate virtual machine?
Oh, if you're already running them in a virtual machine, then that's an easy way to do it. Yeah, I always think like a server or a machine that's running a site, not VMs and that. But I think it's really common to run things like this in VMs. So yeah, a separate VM would be ideal if you're already running it in a VM.
All right, and then there's another in the chat from Carol Runyon. We access our ArchivesSpace MySQL database pretty regularly. For example, today I needed to run a very simple select from table to be able to create a spreadsheet for a student assistant of mine to perform some quality assurance work for our digital objects. It's an easy query and really helpful. So that's an example of something a non-tech savvy user could do on the back end.
Yeah, it's a perfect example. I knew there must be something else.
So while we wait for maybe some more questions to come in on the chat, I'll ask Laney. Laney, what if I am a community member who would like to volunteer my own coding abilities to ArchivesSpace? What can I do?
Get in contact with me immediately. Normally what we've done, we've had people who've contacted us either through ArchivesSpace Home or me directly, either way works. And usually we sit down and we talk about what they're interested in, a little bit about what they've done so far, that kind of thing, and talk about some of the open tickets that we have in Jira. And generally we would get them started on something that might be not way in the weeds of ArchivesSpace, but more on a little bit deeper, but not too deep, and set up times in which we can continue to talk with each other, or I also suggest that they talk to the core committers group, which has a monthly meeting, and of course I'm blanking on when. That's an open call for anybody who wants to come, and it's where we talk about issues and things that are going into the core code base. But we are very excited when people say they want to participate, so please contact us.
But you don't have to be a coder to help.
No, you don't. Not at all.
All you have to do is be able to read, because you can help with the documentation.
That's right.
And even I can do that.
Oh, thank you, Christine.
So let's say I am interested in becoming a core committer or just helping out in any way. What sort of time commitment would I need to make, and sort of what does your ideal volunteer look like?
I think the time commitment can be as little or as much as you have. Everyone who is volunteering their time, we're just happy to have them participate and to help us grow and learn more about ArchivesSpace and how it works and improve it and enhance it as we go along. So there's not really a minimum amount of time we expect. We want people 100% of the time, 24/7, but I know that's impossible. So there's really not a minimum time commitment. And I can't remember the rest of your question.
What an ideal volunteer would look like.
Oh, somebody who is interested in ArchivesSpace and archives. That's it.
Easy enough.
It doesn't take much to make a big difference with any open source project. It just takes, a single pull request to make a big difference. So
You'd be amazed. One little itty bitty change can really change a whole perspective on one piece.
Even if it's just finding an error in one of the documents or anything, reporting a bug helps.
Yep.
All right. Well, we haven't gotten any more questions in the chat. So any final comments from the panelists?
Don't think so.
All right. Well, in that case, I will turn it back over to Stephen, our host for this session. But thank you, everyone that either submitted a question ahead of time or submitted a question in the chat. If you have a question and you weren't able to get it to us in time, please follow up with the email addresses that Blake put in the chat and with the resources, the great resources that everyone was linking. But thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jessica and Patrick.
Thank you.